Our next session is the book launch of The Memory Keepers, Future Seekers, Portraits of Heritage Homes in Goa with photographer Ulka Chauhan, art writer, independent curator Simira Sheth, joined by partner and principal architect, Mosaic Designs Combined, Dean De Cruz. The book takes us on a visual and literary tour of Goa's cultural heritage through 300-year-old homes, exploring the stories embedded in these architectural marvels. Please welcome Ulka, Samira, and Dean after the short video.
You are one house, but many homes. Sheltering stories, centuries old. Whispers waft within your weathered walls, of generations lit by your chandeliered halls. Your keepers, they will come and go, but linger on in afterglow. Will your memories withstand the hourglass? Or like the sands of time, will they too pass? Consider these musings my silent prayer, that your soul survives the changing tide, confronting or conceding with pride.
Poetry of Goa's long-standing homes. Identity, belonging, culture, community, architecture, home. We are delighted to launch our book, The Memory Keepers and Future Seekers, in this graceful heritage building. Good evening, everybody. Ulka, can you give us a brief overview of the book?
I would like to start at the very end of the book, the last chapter, featured in our book as the House of Reflections. This is the home of family Colasso on the beautiful Mandovi riverfront in Ribandar. To quote homeowner Jyoti Botello, "We have had several offers for this house. I once had this man from the Middle East who said he wants to buy it. I told him, you won't be able to afford it. And he said, yes, of course I can. I'll give you a blank check and you can write any amount you want. And so I said, it is not that. If you buy the house, it is going to be just a house, like so many houses all over the world. But for us, it is home." And he said, "Gosh, you Indians are so emotional." And I said, "Yes, and we Goans are much more." This quote, I believe, sums up the character and spirit of the book, The Memory Keepers and Future Seekers, portraits of heritage homes in Goa that are centuries old and were built during the colonial Portuguese era. Through personal stories and fragments of memories of families, the book also touches upon the larger moments of history that were instrumental in the making and shaping of Goa.
There are so many beautiful homes like this, in this style of architecture, dotted through the narrow lanes and by-lanes of Goa, through its palm and paddy-fringed heartland. How did you decide to feature these 6, and why only 6?
So each of the 6 homes featured in the book are living and breathing homes. They continue to function as a center stage on which this theater of life plays out. During the research phase of the project, I visited well over several Goan homes, well over 20, I believe they were. But, after I decided to focus on 6 in particular, because I felt it was important to strike that balance between contextualizing the work, but also capturing its essence. So as you've seen in the video, we have 6 homes, which are titled House of Belongings, House of Confluence, of Dialogue, Duality, Evergreen, and House of Reflections. Each of these names were given to them by us based on both the tangible and the intangible attributes that have made these homes unique.
Dean, speaking of the intangible, there are so many cliched ways of looking at Goa as a place of hedonistic bohemian indulgence on its beaches, or as a place of sleepy, Susegad villages. But these stately, sophisticated homes are so much more. They give one a different understanding of, an entirely different understanding of Goa and of Goans. How would you describe the ethos of Goa? What is Goa? What makes it so special?
I'm always nervous between two women. Well, actually, I mean, Goa is all about its natural beauty, its built heritage, and it's also its great cultural diversity. I mean, over the ages, I mean, from tribals to the Kadamba dynasty, to the Adil Shah, to the Portuguese, and now to the Ahmad Shah dynasty. We have seen this change that's taken, and its richness has come from that. Unfortunately, it's also led to the sort of destruction that we see today, because it's being this really attractive place, this little bit of paradise in India, it's led to the rush into this place as well.
Yeah, and Goa's rich, complex, like you mentioned, intertwined histories, 450 years of Portuguese rule, the fact that this tiny coastal state was once the capital of the Portuguese Empire in the east, one of the largest maritime empires the world has ever seen. And it's fascinating that Goa's architecture is not fully Portuguese and fully Goan. Where an angan and an altar coexist in the same built space, like we saw in the Fernandes home in Shandor, which is featured in the book as the House of Confluence, or at the Figueiredo home in Luthuli, featured in the book as the House of Duality, where we saw church chairs from the period of King Jose I, sitting side by side with chairs carved with motifs from Hindu mythology. So there's so much confluence going on. And how would you describe this, how this architectural imprint evolved into this hybrid of indigenous and cosmopolitan, much like the Goan identity itself? How would you describe this? Is it Goan? Is it Portuguese? Is it Indo-Portuguese?
Yeah, it is. I mean, of course, in the marketing terms, they say about Portuguese architecture, but it's really a unique architecture, which is, you can see an influence of a European style of architecture, but it's an architecture that's evolved with craftspeople who are, very much part of Goa. In fact, the house I live in is built by a craftsperson from Mandre, and you can see the adopting of styles. On the place where our house is, there was a large banyan tree, and the memory, there were a lot of cobras in the area, and the memory of those cobras are actually enshrined in the pillars at the entrance itself. So there's a memory of whatever was there. Every house is very different. We can see they take elements, they explore them, they piece them together, and there's a certain uniqueness. And there were no architects at that time. It's just these really talented master craftspeople that put this architecture together, people who had the sensitivities to actually bring it all together as one piece and respond to what was needed at that time.
The context, the Goan sort of landscape, yeah. Ulka, you spend so much time in these homes documenting these spaces and the lives of the people who live within these age-old walls. Your images are so layered in what they reveal, what they withhold. There are scenes within scenes in so many of your images. What about the story of these Goan homes resonates with you?
So Samira, as you know, in the early days of this project, it was really the architectural aesthetics of the home that spoke to me. Goan homes are so visually rich. They're really a photographer's paradise. Right from the vibrant hued facades, the textured and pigmented interior walls, the glittering crystal chandeliers, or the patterned mosaic floorings, and even the oyster shell windows. Everywhere I looked, there was something I could capture through my viewfinder. But the longer that I worked on this project, I realized that it was not the physicality of the architecture or the antiques or the artifacts, but rather the stories and memories contained within them that had in turn captured me. And it is these stories and memories that I believe form the emotional foundations of what makes a house a home.
There is this gentle emotive arc that flows through your images. And can you tell us about the cover image and what its significance to the book?
Sure. No. So the cover image is one of the many images within the book that are now forever etched in my memory. It is a portrait of a quintessential Goan home, which features in the book as the House of Dialogue. It is home of family Viegas, situated at the end of a picturesque Ashoka tree-lined street in the village of Kurturi in South Goa. But at its core, this cover image is a portrait of the elderly Marianne Viegas, and you can see her sitting there, her fragile frame framed through several solid teakwood door frames. I like this image because we see through a corridor of frames within frames that leads the eye all the way from the balcony outside, past the entrada, through the liminal space in which she sits, into the very heart of the home, the kitchen. But what I love about the image is that we only see a partial glimpse of her, and this sort of creates a sense of mystery in terms of what she is doing. When I first photographed her, I thought she was sitting at her breakfast table having her morning cup of tea or coffee, when in fact she was sitting at her Bible table practicing her morning ritual of coloring, an activity that was actually prescribed to her by her daughter to stimulate her mind and boost her memory. So as you can see, the narrative of this moment is also so very fitting to the narrative of the book, The Memory Keepers.
That is such a poignant image. And of course, in the book, one gets a glimpse of these majestic homes, but it's more the stories and memories of their occupants, like you said, that take center stage. And memory is not something linear, it's not tangible, it's not rigid, it's not controllable, but it's not even particularly reliable. But it's so deeply personal and felt, and it's very interesting to have met the memory keepers and see the ways in which they hold memory. And in a few years, there may be no one left to tell these stories. So we met, like here we have Rafael Vegas, for instance, and it was a very special memory for Ulka and me because we were invited to his 92nd birthday party, where only immediate family was present. And he's sitting in his grand sala or ballroom, which he's converted into a library. And he has this huge archive of reading material on the history of Goa. He's got rare books in English and in Portuguese. He's got documents, records. He painstakingly cuts out articles from the newspaper every morning. And he's a valuable resource for academics and scholars across the world. And here he's holding a cover of an issue of the Illustrated Weekly, probably from 1980. He has every issue ever printed. And like you said, Dean, the cover story asks, is Goa a paradise? And inside there's a story on the hippies of Goa, the iconic hippies who became synonymous with Goa. So Raphael holds memory in this sense. And then we have Maria Teresa Colasso, and she's sitting at the head of her 20-seater rosewood dining table, sitting elegantly with her caretaker by her side. And she lived in this beautiful, breathtaking riverfront home, featured in the book as the House of Reflections. And her memory was fading in her later years, so her nephew Tonito and his wife Jyoti took her to their home because she'd suffered a few falls. And they told us they had to take her back because even though she lost her speech, she kept indicating she wanted to be back home. And sadly, she passed away earlier this year at the age of 94. And I found it profoundly moving that while she couldn't remember much, she remembered she wanted to be in her own home. And she felt somewhere deep inside that powerful pull of the universal human instinct for home. Dean, you build homes as part of your professional architectural practice. How do you see architecture as going beyond form and function, as a conduit to time and memory, as a site where lives are lived? And you spoke about your experience, but living in your own home is over 100 years old. So.
Yeah, it actually brings memory of my own dad, who actually lived most of his life in Bombay. And the last few years, he wanted to be in Goa itself. Yeah. And so it really draws you back to the place. Yeah. Talking about form and function, really, I mean, Charles Greer, well-known architect, quite sure everyone knows, his terminology was form follows climate, and which is so true because we live in a tropical region in which really climate shapes our lives. And it's not just the climate of a particular region, it's the materials that are available around that actually shape. So in Goa, for example, you have laterite, you've got wood, and these really shape the architecture that we see around us. I mean, every village had its own quarries, so you could get the laterite from, within a kilometer away. And the craftspeople would actually work with that, work with the laterite, work with the stonework. At times there were, metal craftspeople and people who did like cement floors. And these were traditional craftspeople that were part of the village itself. So you didn't have to go much beyond that boundary. And that created a building craft which actually, enriched Goa. I think when you also talk about large houses, and it creates community because the moment you have a large house, it actually begs for company. It begs for people to use it. And that creates community and it's community that really holds people together. We see in the pandemic that, it's really the community that comes together. And it's in areas where you're able to. In cities, it's a lot more difficult. But in a village, and Goa is full of villages, I think that really, brings people together. But I think while we talk about houses and we talk about, that's Goa, I think it's really the village that is Goa. I mean, I worked on the regional plan for Goa, and we recognize that the village is the cell of development, where really it holds the ethos of what it stands for. It has everything within its confines. It's almost autonomous in a way. It has, its fields, its forest areas, its grazing lands, its water sources. And yeah, so that sense of, geography actually brings and the sense of unity and community.
Of course. I mean, and some of the homeowners did tell us that they used to leave their doors and windows open and the neighbors could just walk through their homes without any invitation, without any doorbell, nothing, Ulka, you crisscross the world in your quest for images. You've lived in 4 countries across 4 continents. And with this book, you're looking at the lives of families and people who lived in one home for generations. So what has this process of working on the book meant to you? Was it a kind of homecoming for you too?
So after 2 decades of living abroad, across countries and continents, I finally returned to India and soon after began this photo exploration documenting the old Goan homes. And indeed, Samira, it was a homecoming of sorts because as I worked on this 4-year-long process, I began to feel so much at home in Goa. Goa is truly so special. And in particular, these homes, they have seen the rise and fall of a whole empire. The land they stand on changed from being a Portuguese state for 450 years to becoming a part of India upon liberation in 1961. But apart from these histories at large, which also feature within the book, these homes have been witnesses to life. They have seen everything from childhood mischief, love, longing, and loss, festivities and faith, passion and pain, and even babies being born and elders passing. Entire cycles of life have played out within these walls several times over through the generations and centuries. And so I feel with these families that are featured in this book, it's been their deep-rooted connectedness to the home and the land that has really moved me. It's in a way got me reflecting on my own sense of belonging and what home really means to me. As the iconic photographer Ansel Adams rightly says, the lens looks both ways.
That's true. And apart from looking to the past with these memories and stories, the book also serves to spark conversation about the futurity of these homes. As Alvaro Vegas says of his Vegas home, featured in the book as the House of Dialogue, Goan homes are not merely the memory keepers, they are also future seekers. The house grows and lives with you. Nothing is permanent, everything is in transition, and change is inevitable. Dean, how do you see a future for these homes of the past in Goa's quickly changing present? How do you see their relevance?
I think they act as sentinels for one of what the past was, but they also provide a sort of vocabulary for what the future is. Unfortunately, as architects, I don't know how many can really draw from that because we have an architecture that's, for those of you who've been to Goa recently, it's changing very fast. I mean, Goa has become a commodity. Land prices have shot up 3 times in the last 3 years. So there's tremendous pressure on development. Right now, pieces of land are being sold for luxury homes at 1,650 square feet, which is just 150 square meters. And how you can fit a luxury home into something like that is impossible. So really, it's losing its character very fast. And I think we definitely need a complete rethink on where we're going and a sort of cap on what's happening to Goa. Its fields, its forests are being destroyed at a rapid rate. And it's a good, but we have this great launch of a book. I think it's an opportunity to actually have a reality check on what's really happening to Goa and where do we go from here.
It's true, and I feel that in times when Goa is changing so much with the proliferation of development and, as you said, second homes, hospitality, gastronomy, and with a whole new wave of people coming in from the cities to visit or to make it their home, I feel like it is these homes that kind of keep our memory of the real Goa alive, in a way.
Guardians of the beauty, in a way. Ulka, before we wrap, could you read us an excerpt from the book?
Sure. So I started this conversation at the end of the book. And now I'm going to end at the beginning by reading an excerpt from the foreword by art historian Nicole Ann Lobo, who is of Goan origin and currently doing her PhD at Princeton University on the topic of Goan art history. There's an old saying about history and memory. Where histories falter, memories take the reins. Goans are not a people without history, but inheritors of competing histories, constructed over millennia, shaped through centuries of colonial rule, and still not fully liberated. Often misunderstood as merely hybrid, Goan identities occupy a liminal space, the realm of the simultaneously indigenous and cosmopolitan. As a port, Goa long served as India's aperture to the rest of the world. Chilies and marigold flowers, Western medicine, and the printing press. Many Goans converted to Catholicism and expanded the limits of institutional faith through vernacular expressions of devotion. They built homes, lives that drew from myriad cultures and points of reference, brought to Goa through maritime trade. Where histories have imperfectly captured this liminality, Goans' memories have filled in the gaps.
Well, it's been truly very special sharing these stories of Goa's memory keepers with you all. And on your next trip to Goa, do include a tour of these homes. They're truly transportive, almost like journeying through time and space. And now we're so excited to have Dean unveil the book. Asad, can we have you on stage, please?